And welcome to our October edition of Sports Highlights right here on Cox Cable 47, 517 and nnpstv.com. My name is Greg Picaveras, at Greg Pick on Twitter. Our program airs on Mondays at 7 a.m., 2 p.m., and 7 p.m., weekends at 9 a.m. since February of 1992. Our guests today are John Wright, the Woodside High School head wrestling coach, and Carter Moore from the Peninsula Rugby Foundation. She is the executive director. Starting things off with John Wright. Good to see you, John.
Good, thanks for having me.
Tell us about your sports background. You grew up in Williamsburg.
I did. I grew up in Williamsburg. Played, typical little league baseball, football, wrestling since I was about 6 or 7 years old. Played through middle school and played Lafayette High School, all three sports.
Right. How did you get involved in wrestling, and what sport did you draw your heart to the most?
It was really kind of I was kind of spread out all over the place. My first couple years of high school, I wanted to be the All-American three-sport athlete. I wanted to play football in the fall season, wrestle in the winter, and play baseball in the spring and summer. And I'd say around into my sophomore year of high school, had a long talk with my wrestling coach. He said, "Hey, you've got some potential, but we need to kind of commit some more time to it." So at that point, I decided I was going to be all in and kind of try to take my career to another level with wrestling.
How has wrestling evolved as far as the weight limit? Because the weight limit's always been the good side, but we've also seen some of the negative side over the years. But I know it's gotten more modified now.
It has. And I will say that I think the National Federation of High Schools and the Virginia High School League has done a really good job of putting some more stringent measures in place to protect our athletes. I know when I graduated from Lafayette in '97, and it was really kind of just make weight. I remember at least my sophomore and junior year of high school playing, coming in at the beginning of the season around 180 pounds and wrestling around 140 pounds. So losing a lot of weight in a very short amount of time, wearing plastic suits. And I'm sure everybody remembers all the horror stories I've seen the wrestlers in their high schools that are my age, and the guys spitting in cups and doing every other thing to make weight. And nowadays it's a whole lot more regimented. Our athletes come in, and normally around the first or second week in November, we take a hydration test and a body fat calibration test, and we're given a daily decrease in weight based on those measurements. I think a lot of guys when I was in high school would wrestle somewhere between 3 and 5% body fat and be really, really trimmed down. And now with the new measurements, the lowest an athlete can go is 7%. So if they get to that 7%, in December, that's the lowest they're going to wrestle the rest of the season.
How interesting is that, because of a person trying to go on a regular diet and exercise regime compared to that? What's the biggest difference? Let's say if you're watching your carbs or so forth.
I would say that I really kind of preach with my wrestlers just having a consistent nutrition plan. 7% is not far from bodybuilder skin, paper skin. But it's a very healthy body fat percentage to maintain, and again, hydration is a key part of that. So,
yeah, you have to constantly stay hydrated, because you remember back in the day, it would be the real cool thing for a football player not to drink water during the summer practice months. But now it's totally opposite. Your body has to stay hydrated with whatever possible water or energy sports type of nutrition drink.
Absolutely, and during our practice sessions, our workout sessions, we try to integrate at least 2 to 3 water breaks throughout. And if one of my wrestlers says, "Hey, coach, I need some water," well, go get a water fountain, get some water. Once our season kicks in and we're really going, 5 to 6 days a week for 2.5 to 3 hours per day. Last season, we actually mandated our wrestlers carry a gallon of water with them everywhere they went, just to ensure that they were staying hydrated.
You mentioned the plastic suit. For the listeners out there, what exactly is a plastic suit?
A sauna suit, if you go to any of your local department stores, it's kind of a vinyl suit you wear. It keeps kind of elastic around the wrist and waist and ankles. And really what it's designed to do is it kind of suffocates the skin and kind of forces you to sweat more, drawing more water weight out of you.
Mm-hmm. We're talking to John Wright. He's the head wrestling coach at Woodside High School. Talk about all the different places that you've coached, and how did you become a head coach?
So I wrestled at Gardner-Webb University, or after I got out of high school rather. Wrestled there for 2 years and decided I wanted to go be in the military, so I joined the Army. And I wrestled overseas for a little bit in Korea with the U.S. Army. after that, I came back to Virginia and got a regular 9 to 5 and got out of the military and got a regular job, and really kind of went dormant and wasn't really engaged in the sport for a few years. My oldest son, he's 11 now, decided a few years back that he wanted to wrestle. So we said, hey, let's get involved, and I assistant coached a rec program in Williamsburg for a season. The year following, my youngest son decided, well, hey, Dad, I want to wrestle too. So he actually started wrestling, and my oldest son decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So we stayed with it. I actually, the year following, I kind of helped out with the rec program here in Newport News. And then towards, I'd say about 2 years ago now, I just decided I wanted something that, for the sport that I could give back and kind of make it a more holistic approach to the sport. But 2 years ago, I opened my own wrestling club, Intense Wrestling Club, and we decided that for kids that really wanted to try to take their wrestling ability to the next level, we'd open our doors 12 months a year, and we would train at a very high level. So I ran the club for about a year, and we were actually on our way to the Ohio Tournament of Champions in 2015, and got a call from Woodside High School and says, hey, we've got a head coaching position. Are you interested? So the rest was kind of history, as they say.
Another thing to add on your list there, but the demands on your time from being a dad, a coach, to work full-time. You have a full-time job as well. Are there days you don't know where you're going some days?
Fortunately, my wife is extremely understanding.
Okay.
And I would say that none of this would happen without a solid support structure at home. And we kind of have an understanding that usually between September and March, I'm very, very busy. So the club season runs right along with the high school season. So a typical day in my life between September and March is I'm normally up by about 5:30. I'm normally getting off of work around 3:30, 4 o'clock. Our practice sessions for the high school go from 4 to 6, and our club sessions go from 6 to 7:30, 6 to 8 o'clock. High school tournaments are normally Fridays, Saturdays, and our club tournaments are on Sundays. And yeah, I've told the wife, I was like, I can see that there will come a day that I won't have the energy to do this anymore.
Yeah.
But for now, while things are going well, we're going to continue to at least try to offer these kids the opportunity to.
No normal dinner hours for you then?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Let me tell you, thank you for serving our country. How many years did you, and what was the climate like in Korea?
I served for 6 years. Korea, I went to Korea about a year and a half after 9/11. The climate there was a very high operational tempo there. I would say that it was where I was stationed. We were very close to the North Korea demilitarized zone. So yeah, we ran a lot of exercises, field exercises, and there's always a sense of urgency to everything you do.
It didn't seem like as much tension maybe then as it is now, but now with the Winter Olympics in South Korea, that tension in the military is going to have to be proactive 24/7 there.
Absolutely.
When you talk about wrestling, let's talk about the health of wrestling compared to, let's say, boxing or the UFC, and not just high school, but the entire level of sports.
I think that wrestling, I don't want to say it's a dying sport. I think that there's been a lot of lost interest in the sport. I know that here recently, quite a few universities, Boise State has gotten rid of their wrestling program. And I think, in my opinion, I think a big portion of that is, and I'll tell you and I tell my kids and my guys in the wrestling room, if their technique and if their operational tempo is boring, I will tell them. I encourage my guys to go out, and my girls as well, to go out and put on a show. You train hard day in and day out. And when you go out there, it should be a show. It should be something to where people want to come watch you. I think once we get the sport to where wrestling is exciting to see, I think that we'll see growth.
We're talking to John Wright, the head wrestling coach at Woodside High School. Greg Picaveras, glad you're with us. For more, log on to nnpstv.com. Hope you enjoy our sports highlights, our live football games, our school board meetings as well. At Greg Pick on Twitter. Boys and girls wrestling. Talk about it.
Yeah, very exciting time in the sport. as of last year, the Virginia High School League sanctioned their very first all women's, all female high school wrestling tournament. Since then, with cooperation of the USA Wrestling or the Virginia Wrestling Association, we began to offer up to the Virginia High School League, hey, this is a really good thing for the sport. Quite a few colleges here in the past few years have added full women's teams to their athletic offerings with scholarships. And last year we were fortunate enough, we had three or four female wrestlers. And they came in, most of the time they wrestled against boys during their dual meets. Then those tournaments had offered the opportunity for really an apples to apples comparison. So for a girl that weighs 132 pounds to wrestle another girl that weighs 132 pounds, we were very fortunate last year. We lost her this year, but we had a female wrestler, a sophomore, Jessie Obregon, who actually finished number 7th in the country out in Oklahoma at the Tulsa Nationals last year. So it was really exciting. This year, I think we're probably gonna post about 10 to 12 girls on our team.
Talk about your team, anybody standing out, and who's the competition that will give you the toughest challenge this year around your schedule?
We've had a lot of guys that have come in and been super, super dedicated, and they've really committed themselves to the sport this year. We've got quite a few really key returners. Jason McDade, he's going to be a senior. Alex Sachs is going to be a senior this year. Romeo Newell, going to be a senior this year. Matthew Stufel, he's going to be a junior. And Shamar Manchin, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my starting 106-pounder, who was really key, came on last year as a first-year wrestler and just really put it together really quickly. I would say our toughest competition this year, we are scheduled to wrestle in the Virginia Duels at the Hampton Coliseum. We're going to be wrestling in the national division, which is really doesn't typically host a lot of Virginia schools. It's really, that division has a lot of schools that specialize in wrestling. A lot of private schools from all over the country come, and I think that's exactly what the competition we're going to need going into our postseason, so I'm really excited about that.
Very good. John Wright, Woodside High School head wrestling coach, thank you so much.
Thank you,
It was
sir.
a pleasure talking to you. All the best, and thank you again for serving our country and for all that you do for the sport of wrestling as well.
Thank you.
All right, go by and see Woodside High School's Wolverines team in wrestling action this season at Woodside High School and also on the road as well. We'll talk to Carter Moore after these messages on the October edition of Sports Highlights.
You're going to need me. You're going to need us. All of us. You're going to need our help with your water, your air, your food. You're going to need our determination, our compassion. You're going to need the next generation of leaders to face the challenges the future will bring. And we promise we'll be there when you need us.
And welcome back to our October edition of Sports Highlights. Hope you enjoyed the interview with John Wright, the head wrestling coach at Woodside High School. We shift gears to rugby. Greg Pickaveris, glad you're with us as we talk to Miss Carter Moore from the Peninsula Rugby Foundation. She is the executive director. Carter, good to see you.
Nice to be here.
Tell us about your background. You went to school in Virginia Beach.
I did. I graduated from Ocean Lakes High School. From there, I went to the University of Mary Washington. That's actually where I originally got involved in rugby. I had never done anything with the sport prior to that. When I went to Mary Washington, they have like the club fair that day, and or the first day, and so I went and I signed up and went to the first practice, and I fell in love, and so the rest is history.
We'll talk about your sports background, how you got involved in rugby prior to. Is there anything that sparked your interest as a young girl?
No, actually, I really didn't know anything about it until college. We did have a rugby club at Ocean Lakes, but I didn't know about it. When I got to Mary Washington and I started playing, I just fell in love with the sport. I had some really great coaches, Chris Kabza and Bill Lucas. They just were really great at passing that love of the sport on, and so I spent all 4 years playing in college, and that was the end of.
Any other sports that you liked while you were in high school, though, were you a sports fan?
I've always been a sports fan. Growing up, I played a little bit of basketball, a little bit of volleyball, a little bit of softball. None of those really just stuck with me. I am pretty tall, so most people assume that I played basketball, but no, rugby was it for me.
Well, very good. Let's talk about rugby. How relevant is rugby locally in Hampton Roads, and how relevant is it around the country? I was a part of one rugby broadcast years ago, but it just doesn't seem like it sustains. I know it's popular at the club level, at the collegiate level. Several colleges have it, but how come it's not like a Division I or II or III sport that's front and center like football, basketball, and baseball?
It's definitely a growing sport. It is also a foreign sport, so it is very popular in other countries, and it's something that's still growing here in America. This past Summer Olympics, they did have rugby sevens, which was huge for the sport. That was really getting the sport back out there. I think a lot of it is that not a lot of people know about rugby or what it is. A lot of people get this false impression that rugby is football without pads, but really, truly, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to, because you don't have protection like you do in football, there's a lot more technique into tackling and a lot of the contact that you do. And so I don't think people quite realize that. And I think that there's kind of almost a sense of fear that comes when people say rugby. They say, "Oh no, that's tough," or "Oh man, that's crazy." But it's not as dangerous or as rough as people think it is.
I will say this: in all the sports I've ever been a part of, announcing a rugby match was the toughest because you really have to know the rules as much as you can. But let's talk about it. You mentioned the equipment, the ball, the gear. What is the attire?
So rugby, you typically wear rugby shorts, which are a tougher material because you do use them in lineouts to lift the players. And then you have your jersey, and that's it. You have a mouth guard. Some players you'll see wear what looks like the leatherhead football hats. Those are called scrum caps. Those are not required. All that you have to have is a mouth guard to play. So.
Is it equal men and women here in Hampton Roads, or primarily men and some women?
As far as Hampton Roads, there's more boys and men's club than there are women's clubs, but we are hoping to change that. That's part of what the Peninsula Rugby Foundation wants to do. We want to grow the sport so there's equal opportunity for men and women and girls and boys to play.
What's the youngest, what's the oldest you've seen?
So rugby is capable to be played, they have youth, which is 4th to 8th grade, and then high school. So it can be played, it's not contact at the earlier ages, but it can be played that young. Here locally, we are trying to grow a program so we can have it across the board. We are actually starting a program this fall with Nelson Elementary, where we will be doing an after-school program with 5th graders. So it won't be contact, but it will be an opportunity for them to get exposed to rugby.
All right, we're talking to Carter Moore. She's with the Peninsula Rugby Foundation, Executive Director. Talk about some of the player, the personnel, and also the competition you play against.
So we locally here, we play amongst the high schools, which is what I coach. I coach high school boys currently. We have 4 teams: Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, and Virginia Beach. There are different leagues and levels. There's also men's teams, which also have Hampton, Newport News, Norfolk, and Virginia Beach as well. And so we compete with more of areas than we do specific schools right now. But for high school, our season is in the spring, and we'll play those teams, and then we'll go to the state tournament, which will play up a lot of teams in Northern Virginia. We meet normally around Richmond area.
Let's talk about the club as far as the clock is concerned, how long it takes, the rules as far as the time limits, the halftime, and so forth.
So for
a typical game length.
For a typical game length for men and for college level, it's 40-minute halves. There is no stoppage of the clock like there is in football. That 40 minutes rolls more like soccer. You have a 10-minute halftime and then another 40-minute half. When you're playing high school level, you have 35-minute halves.
All right, in soccer, you can't use your hands unless you're the goalie. What are the rules as far as rugby? And also, you hear that word scrum a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
So you carry the ball more like you would in football. The only difference between the ball handling is that the ball can never be passed forward intentionally. So that's a big difference between American football and rugby. But as far as hand usage, other than that, it can be used. You can also kick the ball forward. The scrum is kind of what everybody knows. It's kind of, the Hollywood version of rugby. Mm-hmm. The scrum is actually a centerpiece for coming off of a penalty. If the ball is thrown forward or knocked forward, a minor penalty like that, then they will reset in a scrum. Your forwards are the players that typically go into your scrum, and those tend to be a little bit bigger players, more endurance-based. Your backs are your fast sprinters. They're the ones who will take the ball or get the ball once it comes out of the scrum.
Sure, talking to Carter Moore with the October edition of Sports Highlights. For more, log on to nnpstv.com, see archive shows on the website as well as YouTube as well. When you talk about players per side, how many and usually how big is a roster?
A healthy roster would be about 30 players in a game. You have 15 players per team. So really, truly, to be able to build and develop, you want to have about 30 to 40 players on your team. So you can, when you do practice, you can do scrimmages and things like that.
How about social media promoting it, and how do you promote? Obviously, we promote it on this show right here, but how do you promote your team as far as, and how do you secure locations to play at with insurance and so forth? Because it is a physical sport.
Mm-hmm. So USA Rugby does a lot of that, covers a lot of that. We do have paperwork that we fill out with them, as well as Virginia Rugby. They cover a lot of that. As far as locally goes and reserving fields, we just reserve them through the city. So for high school rugby and for the men's rugby team for Newport News, we typically practice and play at Crittenden Middle School. So we just reserve that, and that's where we play.
When is the season?
For the men's team, it's in the fall, and for the high school team, it's in the spring.
Right. Talking to Carter Moore right here with the Peninsula Rugby Foundation. For more, log on to nnpstv.com for sports highlights. Hope you enjoy all of our great programming and our program guide as well, all on nnpstv.com. When you mention rugby on TV, what do you watch and what do you try to learn from when you watch a game? What intrigues you the most?
When you watch professional rugby, one of the things that you'll notice is how quickly it moves, and actually how there's not as much contact because the ball moves so quickly that if there is contact, it's very quick, concise, they're back up and getting back into the game. And that's really what I try to get my players to do. Tackles should be quick and efficient. You should be back on your feet, back out and running. It's not about, trying to muscle someone to the ground. It's about quick movement so you don't wear yourself out, because you do have to play for a full 80 minutes. There's only 7 subs around in the sport allowed during a game in the sport of rugby. So if they tire out, I can't keep pulling people off my roster. I get 7 chances and that's it.
What are some of the teams that people might recognize on television?
The All Blacks is probably the most popular team. That's the New Zealand team. That's probably the most noteworthy team that you would know.
Right. And as far as you mentioned the referees and so forth, are they constantly stopping the clock? You mentioned the clock doesn't stop. And talk about how many officials are there per game.
Normally for local levels, there's going to be 1 official. They're your 1 ref. They do not stop the clock unless it's for injury. Other than that, things keep rolling, even in penalties. So if there's a scrum to restart, if the ball goes out of bounds, that does not stop the clock. There's just a certain set piece that comes up in order to restart the game. But the clock continues to roll. There is no timeouts. Coaches can't call timeouts.
Wow.
So really, truly, injury is the only thing that stops the clock.
And of course, halftime, right?
Right, and halftime.
Right. You talk about the people involved in it, and a lot of them are working full-time locally yourself. How much time do you devote to it, and how about the players itself? Because everybody's got a life, and everybody's got a schedule. It's always hard to get from A to B, especially, as you know, growing up here, from the Newport News to the South Side.
Right.
On any day.
Yes. One thing that I've noticed, pretty much anyone you talk to that's played or plays or participates in rugby, is their love for the sport. And so, as far as hours a week that I put to it, I really couldn't tell you. I love it, so it's not like work to me. It's something that I want to spend my spare time doing. And I think that's true of a lot of people. A lot of people who play really have a passion and a love for the sport when they come out, and you don't even realize how much time you spend doing or thinking about it.
Do you play a lot yourself?
I no longer play.
Mm-hmm.
I just played mostly in college.
Mm-hmm. But you talk about the administrative side of it. You're always doing some type of paperwork, and there's no such thing as 9 to 5. I mean, you're always on your phone or you're emailing no matter what time of the evening, correct?
Right. So there's a lot of things that you want to orchestrate, as far as making sure when you have game times, making sure that you have a ref set up, a field set up, a medic set up. You have to have all those things. When you're a coach, you want to think about making sure your players have water, making sure that they have all their materials, making sure everyone has a mouth guard, making sure everyone has shorts. So there's definitely a lot of things that you're constantly thinking about, constantly preparing for. It's kind of like being a parent. You need to prepare for everything. So
Right.
When I coach high school, I try to make sure that I have everything that I could possibly think of for any situation.
Well, how about like coaching strategies? Let's say for football, they might say, well, work on the offense or work on the defense. Basketball, do more rebounds. Baseball, try to eliminate the errors. What is the key strategy for rugby?
One of the things that I coach to, and I think is the most important thing, is actually the mental aspect of the game, because it is such a physical sport. Any one little thing, whether it be a scrape or a bruise or someone hits you the wrong way, it can get in your head. And when you start to get down, you start to not think clearly, that's when you start to play poorly. And so one of the things that I try to coach to and I try to teach my players is mental toughness. I think that's one of the most important things about rugby. In order to be an effective player, you have to be mentally strong.
That's a great point too, and you and I are both Virgos, so we know that. But still, it really is, when you think about the concussion protocol for soccer and for football, for kids and adults both, rugby is a physical sport and you can have concussions.
So that's why we focus on tackling effectively and correctly. I spend a lot of time coaching proper tackling technique to make sure that they don't put their heads in positions where it would cause concussions. Accidents happen, injuries happen, that's true of every sport, but we want to try to coach to a level where we can minimize that as much as possible.
Anything you want to promote social media-wise while we're at it, with Twitter or Facebook?
Definitely look up Newport News Rugby Club, look up the Peninsula Foundation. If you guys are interested in playing, my contact is all over those things, so please feel free to reach out.
And really anybody can play but you have to be in pretty decent shape to play. It's a physical sport.
It is a physical sport, but we try to condition you to get into shape so that way you can play rugby.
And like you said, physical and mental both.
Yes.
Very important. All right, that is Carter Moore from the Peninsula Rugby Foundation, Executive Director. Thank you for all your time, your talent, and your treasure as well. And thank you for being on the show. Absolutely, it was a lot of fun, folks. It really was. We talked to John Wright, who's a Woodside High School head wrestling coach, and also Carter Moore from the Peninsula Rugby Foundation. She is the executive director. Two very unique, intriguing sports, and there really is something for everyone, like John said, for guys and gals, and right here what Carter said as well, for guys and gals in the wonderful sport of rugby too. So happy October. For Ray Price and the entire wonderful crew, I'm Greg Pickaveras. Thank you to Fazoli's, and we'll talk to you soon.